In ancient Rome, a newborn baby had no guaranteed right to live, not until the father decided otherwise. With a single gesture, bending down to lift the child into his arms or simply turning away, the fate of a tiny life was sealed forever, and there was no appeal, no court, no one to intervene. Historians estimate that in some Roman communities, as many as 1 in 10 newborns may have been abandoned this way, quietly, legally, and almost without comment. This is the story of one of the coldest customs in human history. Why did the ancient Romans abandon their own children? And what really happened to the ones who were left behind? To understand why, we have to understand a single, extraordinary Roman idea, patria potestas, the power of the father. This was not simply the right to raise a child. It was an absolute legal power of life and death over every member of the household, a wife, sons, daughters, even grown adult children who had families of their own. The moment a baby was born, a midwife would place it directly on the floor, not in anyone's arms. And the father, he alone, decided what happened next. If he chose to accept the child, he would kneel down and physically lift it from the ground, a ritual the Romans called tollere liberum, literally to raise up the child. This single motion was the entire legal ceremony. There was no birth certificate, no priest, no formal declaration. Lifting the baby meant the child now had a name, a place in the family, and eventually an inheritance. But if the father simply turned and walked away, the child, in the eyes of Roman law, had never existed at all. No name, no rights, no protection. It was entirely, chillingly, his decision alone. So what made a father turn away? The reasons were rarely random. They followed clear, repeating patterns. The most common reason was poverty. Many Roman households, especially outside the wealthy elite, lived right at the edge of survival, and one more mouth to feed could tip a family from hardship into ruin. The second major reason was gender. Sons carried the family name forward, inherited property, and could serve in the legions, building the family's status. Daughters, on the other hand, required a dowry when they eventually married, a costly obligation rather than a future asset. Because of this imbalance, baby girls were abandoned at significantly higher rates than boys, a pattern historians have traced through Roman letters, census records, and simple household accounts. The third reason was physical weakness or visible disability at birth. Romans often viewed a sickly or deformed newborn as an ill omen, something that could bring misfortune down on the entire household, not just the child. And the fourth reason was quieter, but just as devastating: suspicion. If a husband believed, rightly or wrongly, that his wife had been unfaithful, the newborn could be rejected purely on that suspicion, with no evidence required, and no way for the mother to defend herself. In a society where a father's word was legally final, doubt alone could be a death sentence for a child who had done nothing at all. Once the decision was made, it was almost always the mother, not the father, who had to carry it out. Roman law gave her no say in the outcome, but tradition still placed the physical burden of abandonment on her shoulders. She would wrap the baby carefully in a plain cloth, hold it close one final time, memorize its face, and then step out into the early morning light carrying a small woven basket. There was no court to appeal to, no official to petition, no neighbor who would intervene on the child's behalf. This was simply how things were done. She would walk, often for a long time, down narrow stone streets that were only just beginning to wake up, passing shuttered shops and quiet doorways, knowing with complete certainty that this walk would not end with her child in her arms again. Roman writers rarely recorded what these mothers felt. Their grief left almost no trace in the historical record, but the sheer number of infants abandoned across the empire suggests that this walk and this silence repeated itself in nearly every Roman town, year after year, for centuries. Remarkably, the Romans even had an official location for this practice. It was called the Columna Lactaria, the milk column, standing near the busy Forum Holatorium marketplace in the heart of the city. Mothers could leave their infants at its base, in the faint hope that a wet nurse passing by or a family looking to raise extra hands for labor might take the child in. But the column was only one option among many, and often not the nearest one. Countless infants were left along the muddy banks of the Tiber River, on rubbish heaps just outside the city walls, on temple steps, or simply at a crossroads where the child's entire future depended on nothing more than who happened to walk by first. A kind stranger, an indifferent passerby, or someone looking to profit from an unclaimed life. There was no system tracking these children, no registry, no way to know how many were left, or how many survived even their first cold night alone. And more often than historians would like to admit, the person who found an abandoned infant was not a kind family looking to adopt. It was frequently a slave trader or a professional beggar, people who made a grim business out of quietly patrolling the places where infants were left. To them, an unclaimed baby was simply free property, no paperwork, no family to answer to, no one asking questions later. These children were often raised deliberately to become slaves, servants, or beggars, sometimes treated as little more than a renewable resource in a shadow economy that Roman law simply chose not to see. Many of these babies did not survive their first few days exposed to the elements. For those who did survive, childhood simply meant exchanging one kind of abandonment for another kind of exploitation, spending their years working, begging, or serving with almost no legal path back to freedom or family. Yet not every story from this era ends in darkness. A small number of abandoned children were found by genuinely kind families who chose to raise them as their own, regardless of blood ties. The Romans had a word for these rescued children, alumni, meaning those who were nourished or raised up. Some later Roman legal texts even debated the rights of these alumni, whether they deserved inheritance, protection, or simply gratitude toward the family that saved them. For these fortunate few, the basket left by the roadside was not the end of their story, but a rare and genuine second chance at a different kind of life. One built not on blood, but on the choice of a stranger to show mercy. It took centuries and the gradual rise of Christianity across the Roman world for public attitudes toward child abandonment to truly begin shifting. Christian communities increasingly viewed every human life as sacred from birth, and church leaders spoke out publicly against the practice, encouraging believers to rescue abandoned infants rather than walk past them. By the year 374 AD, Emperor Valentinian I took the decisive step of formally criminalizing child abandonment across the empire, officially classifying it, for the first time in Roman history, as a punishable crime rather than a private family decision. Over the following decades, structures like the Columna Lactaria slowly fell out of use and eventually crumbled into the same quiet ruins that tourists walk past in Rome today, mostly unaware of what once happened there. Standing among those ruins now, it's worth pausing to ask an uncomfortable question. If you had lived under that same brutal, unforgiving pressure to survive, with no safety net, no social support, and the law fully on your side to simply walk away, what would you have done? If this video made you think, even for a moment, leave a comment below and share your perspective. And consider subscribing so we can keep exploring the darker, forgotten corners of history together.